Simply put, the Final Fantasy series has been the most successful and innovative in video game history. The games have captured fans by always staying on the cutting edge of technology and storytelling. Final Fantasy X is no exception. As usual, the game has a completely new storyline and a new combat system. Recently, we went to Japan and talked to the team at Squaresoft to find out how they're keeping the series fresh.
Final Fantasy X takes place in a big city called Zanarkand. They play a fictional sport called Blitzball there. The main character is a popular player in this sport and comes to a place called Spila to play. When he tries to return to his hometown, he meets many different people, and that's where the story starts. In order to shock and surprise the players the way I did in Final Fantasy VII and VIII, we had to keep including new elements in the game that nobody thought of before. In Final Fantasy X, we could add the voiceovers for the characters and show the facial expressions very well. Because of that, I kept the overall story very simple. For the theme of Final Fantasy X, all of us wanted to create something that other companies hadn't done. That was our main goal. Independence is the main theme for the story. Independence from society or parents as you grow up.
This time we're introducing the count time battle system instead of using active time battle, which we used in the previous games. In this system, the player can stop time during any part of the battle. Then the player can open up a window on the screen that shows the order of attacks. So the player can play strategically by seeing which monsters are going to attack and which characters will be able to attack. I want the player to enjoy the strategy of the game. For the hardcore gamers who enjoy the battle scenes, we created something called spheres, which you receive by attacking monsters. This item allows your character to advance more quickly. For example, when you damage a monster 1.5 times more than his hit points, you can receive more spheres. This way the game maniac can be satisfied by rewarding them with faster going characters.
Go with the flow.
For the normal player, if they memorize the monster's characteristics, they can finish the battle scenes quicker. That's what we were considering when we created the battle system for this game. We took into account both audiences. By the end of the game, you will have 7 characters in your group, so we gave each character a special skill.
A flyer! That's your department, right?
Why don't we let our summoner show us what she's made of?
This way the player has to utilize each of the different characters.
Nothing to fear, the hero's here!
I want the player to think about each character's skills when you battle a strong monster, so you know which character should fight against which monster. In previous Final Fantasy games, when you would summon a monster, they gave one special attack and then left. So they were usually like magic attacks. But this time when you summon a monster, they stick around and fight alongside you.
Please, fight with us!
The summoned monsters are very important for the storyline, so I thought that the player might enjoy seeing them in a battle scene. The graphics and designs are much better this time, so the game has a greater impact. A new element that we introduced is an event scene. You will usually see these when you are fighting with a boss. So for example, you can fight on top of a flying ship or the edge of a cliff. We use a special situation to start a battle scene so the surrounding elements become part of the battle. The graphics and the camera work will change depending on the situation. This gives the player a more cinematic feel.
In the Final Fantasy series, we don't limit ourselves to just orchestral music or rock or jazz. We use any kind of music that we think is interesting. We use an orchestra and a chorus, as we have in the previous Final Fantasy games. But this time, we also use some rock and roll sounds to give some scenes a harder edge. There's a song in Final Fantasy X sung by a folk singer named Riki. She lives on an island south of Japan called Amami. We asked her to sing the main theme song in Final Fantasy X. She has such a great and beautiful voice that we're not going to translate the song into English. Even though the American audience is not going to know what she is singing about, they should grasp the feelings and emotions she is trying to get across. I'm looking forward to see what you think about it. And of course, the song will be on the US soundtrack.
Right after finishing up production of Final Fantasy VIII, we had a meeting to discuss adding voiceovers to match the beautiful images we could create.
Hey, not this way.
And now that we have the PS2 and DVD quality, we have a lot more room to store things, so that everything, including the graphics and sound, can be better.
We called it sin.
The most surprising thing that I experienced in LA when we were recording the voiceovers was that all the actors came to the studio in the morning without any information, and they started right off the bat. And they performed perfectly. In Japan, we requested that all the actors in a scene be in the studio at the same time. But in LA, we recorded each character separately. I was worried how it might work out in the beginning, but it worked out great.
We have been using motion capture since Final Fantasy VIII. We didn't use it that much in Final Fantasy IX because the characters weren't designed to be lifelike. In Final Fantasy X, we used motion capture almost all the time to make the characters seem real. Now that we have the power of the PS2, we were able to have better definition in the battle scenes, with smoother movement and facial expressions for the characters. I really appreciate that we could show these details. Also, we can transition between real-time and full-motion video smoothly now, which makes me really happy. The most challenging part was, well, actually there were a lot of challenges, particularly getting the details of facial expressions and the movement of hair and clothing. The time it took for a scene depends on the complexity of that scene. The shortest time was 2 to 3 weeks. Most of the time, though, it takes about 1 or 2 months. The longest scene we rendered took about half a year. With all the work that's gone into it, Final Fantasy X is sure to blow away longtime fans of the series and new players alike. The Squaresoft team is excited about the game, and so are we. The story of Final Fantasy X is really interesting. So without giving anything away, I want to encourage all the fans of the series not to give up and play all the way to the end of the game. I think you will enjoy the ending.